Everyone loves unsolved mysteries. They're interesting, creepy, scary, and best of all, up to speculation. And yes, I know this type of iceberg has been covered a lot by some other YouTubers, but luckily for all of us, there are tons of different interesting icebergs covering unsolved mysteries. So most likely, you haven't seen this one yet, and this one is a shorter one, relatively speaking, as it only has about 100-something entries. That might sound like a lot, but it's really nothing when you compare it to the ones that have thousands of entries. Who has time for all that? You don't want to spend 7 or 8 hours watching one of those icebergs, so you might as well watch mine. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. Tier 1. Jack the Ripper. First up in this 10-tier iceberg, we have the infamous Jack the Ripper. In 1888, this unidentified serial killer terrorized London's impoverished Whitechapel district, specifically targeting prostitutes. The killer's brutal attacks, involving throat cutting and abdominal mutilations, raised questions about anatomical knowledge. The name Jack the Ripper originated from a letter that may have been a hoax. Despite an extensive police investigation, the murders remain unsolved, sparking enduring public fascination and folklore. The canonical 5 victims are often considered most likely linked to the killer. Tier 2. Mary Terry. Moving on to Tier 2, we encounter Ruthie Mary Terry, also known as the Lady of the Dunes. Discovered on July 26, 1974, in Provincetown, Massachusetts, her body has been examined multiple times in attempts to identify her. In October 2022, the FBI confirmed her identity. Found face down on the beach blanket with auburn hair, painted toenails, and expensive dental work, she suffered severe head injuries, possibly from strangulation, leading to her death. Signs of SA were evident, and some body parts were missing. The case remains unsolved, and she was buried in October 1974. In 2014, funds were raised for a new casket as the original one deteriorated. Tier 4. D.B. Cooper. Continuing our descent into the iceberg, we reach Tier 3, where the enigmatic figure of D.B. Cooper beckons. In a daring act on November 24, 1971, this unknown man hijacked a Boeing 727 aircraft, demanding a ransom of $200,000 and parachutes. After releasing the passengers, he vanished into the night over Washington State, never to be found. Despite 45 years of investigation by the FBI, his identity remains elusive. The case stands as the only unsolved air piracy in commercial aviation history. Speculation about his survival, despite various factors, persists. Even after the official investigation suspension in 2016, enthusiasts continue to pursue theories about his identity and fate. This audacious hijacking prompted significant changes in aviation security. Tier 4. The Boy in the Box. Advancing to Tier 5, we encounter the heartbreaking tale of the Boy in the Box, also known as Joseph Augustus Sorelli, found dead on the side of Saskatchewan Road in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on February 25, 1957. This 4-year-old American boy's extensively beaten and malnourished body remained unidentified for over half a century. In a breakthrough on November 30th, 2022, detectives announced the boy's identity through DNA and geological databases. Joseph Augustus Sorelli was publicly identified more than 65 years after his discovery. However, the circumstances leading to his death remain uncertain, and the case is an open homicide investigation. Tier 5. The Villisca Axe Murders. Moving on to Tier 5, we confront the mysterious Villisca Axe murders that unfolded in the town of Villisca, Iowa on June 9, and 10th, 1912. The 6 members of the Moore family and 2 guests were found bludgeoned with an axe in their residence. Despite a lengthy investigation and multiple suspects, including a trial that ended in acquittal, the crime remains unsolved. The unspeakable tragedy left all 8 victims, including 6 children, with severe head wounds from the axe. Tier 6. The Zodiac Killer. Venturing into Tier 6, we encounter one of the most infamous figures, the Zodiac Killer. Operating in Northern California during the late 1960s, the unidentified serial killer claimed to have killed 37, with 5 confirmed victims. The killer sent taunting letters to newspapers, including cryptograms, sparking international interest and inspiring amateur detectives. Despite numerous theories, the case remains unsolved, with open case files maintained by law enforcement agencies. Tier 7. The Black Delilah. Tier 7 brings us to the tragic tale of Elizabeth Short, known as the Black Delilah. Found murdered in Los Angeles in January 1947, her bisected body captured significant media attention. Despite being described as an aspiring actress, Elizabeth had no known acting credits during her time in Los Angeles. The investigation, with over 150 suspects, failed to result in an arrest, making her murder one of the most famous unsolved cases in U.S. history. Tier 8. The Axeman of New Orleans. Delving into Tier 8, we confront the mysterious Axeman of New Orleans, an unidentified American serial killer active from May 1918 to October 1919. Targeting Italian immigrants and Italian Americans, the Axeman's reign of terror was never conclusively proven to be racially motivated. The murders remain unsolved, leaving the identity of the killer shrouded in mystery. Tier 9. The Murders of Biggie and Tupac. The next tier, Tier 9, dives into the notorious East Coast-West Coast hip-hop feud in the mid-1990s. Centered around the notorious B.I.G. and Puff Daddy from Bad Boy Records on the East Coast, and Tupac and Suge Knight from Death Row Records on the West Coast, this rivalry tragically resulted in the murders of both rappers in separate drive-by shootings. Despite identifying suspects, both murders remain unsolved, leaving a dark stain on the history of hip-hop. Entry 10. The Trial of O.J. Simpson. Ascending to Entry 10, we dive deeper into the notorious trial of O.J. Simpson, a former NFL player, broadcaster, and actor. The trial unfolded from 1994 to 1995, with Simpson charged with the murders of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ronald Goldman. This sensational trial, famously known as the Trial of the Century, garnered immense public attention. Simpson was ultimately acquitted of murder charges, causing divided reactions, particularly along racial lines. The defense asserted mishandling of DNA evidence and claimed the case was tainted by misconduct and racism within the LAPD. Despite the acquittal, Simpson was found liable for the deaths in a civil lawsuit, leading to significant damages. The trial continues to be one of the most publicized criminal cases in history. Entry 11. Hinterkaifeck Murders. Advancing to Entry 11, we encounter the perplexing Hinterkaifeck murders, which unfolded on March 31st, 1922, at a small pharmacy in Bavaria, Germany. 6 inhabitants of the farm, including Andreas Gruber, his wife Kazita, and their daughter Victoria, and her 2 children, were brutally murdered with a mattock. The killers remained at the farm with the bodies for 3 days before the crime was discovered. The case remains one of the most perplexing and gruesome unsolved crimes in German history. Strange noises from the attic were reported before the incident, leading to the maid to leave the farm. The mystery surrounding this case persists, challenging investigators and historians. Entry 12, Austin Yogurt Shop Murders. Moving on to Entry 12, we confront the tragic and unsolved quadruple homicide known as the Austin Yogurt Shop Murders. Occurring on December 6, 1991, at an I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop in Austin, Texas, the victims were 4 teenage girls, including employees Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas, along with customers Surya Harbison and Amy Ayers. The crime involved a shop set on fire after closing, with the girls shot in the head and some even victims of SA. Despite challenges in identifying the perpetrators, the Austin Police Department holds DNA evidence from an unknown male connected to one of the crimes. The case remains unsolved, haunting the community and investigators. Entry 13, Max Headroom Incident. Entry 13 takes us into the bizarre world of the Max Headroom Incident, a signal hijacking that occurred on November 22, 1987 in Chicago, Illinois. Television signals of 2 stations were briefly hijacked, featuring an unidentified person wearing a Max Headroom mask. The pirate broadcast included erratic movements, references to Mac Headroom's advertisements for New Coke, and unrelated topics. Despite an intentional interruption lasting about 90 seconds, a criminal investigation by the Federal Communications Commission failed to identify the culprits. Decades later, the hijackers remain unknown, adding an enduring layer of mystery to this peculiar incident. Entry 14, Beaumont Children. Advancing to Entry 14, we confront the haunting case of the Beaumont children, Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont, disappearing on January 26, 1966, from Glenig Beach near Adelaide, South Australia. The suspected abduction and murder of these siblings sparked worldwide attention. Witnesses reported seeing them with a tall man on the day of their disappearance. Despite numerous searches, neither of the children nor the suspect companion were located. The case influenced Australian lifestyles, causing parents to reassess the safety of unsupervised children in public. As of 2018, a $1 million reward has been offered for information related to this cold case, underscoring the enduring mystery surrounding the Beaumont children. Entry 15, Caddy Cabin Murders. The next entry introduces the chilling case of the Caddy Cabin Murders, an unsolved quadruple homicide occurring on April 11th through 12th, 1981 in Keddie, California, United States. The victims were Glenna Sue Sharp, her daughter Tina Louise Sharp, her son John Stephen Sharp, and John's friend Dana Hall Wingate. The murders took place at house number 28 of the Keddie Resort. Despite several leads and suspects over the years, no charges were filed. New leads, including the discovery of a hammer in 2016 and new DNA evidence, have been announced in the 21st century. However, the case remains unsolved, leaving a haunting mystery shrouded in darkness. Entry 16, The Smiley Face Killer. As we advance to Entry 16, we dive deeper into the enigmatic smiley face killer murder theory. This theory, put forth by retired New York City detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duart, along with Dr. Lee Gibson, suggests that 45 young men found dead in water across several Midwestern American states from the late 1990s to 2010s were not accidental drownings, as concluded by law enforcement agencies. Instead, they proposed that these individuals were victims of a serial killer or killers. The term smiley face became associated with the alleged murders due to graffiti depicting a smiley face found near the locations where the bodies were dumped. Despite skepticism from law enforcement investigators, investigators and other experts, the smiley face killer theory remains a haunting mystery, challenging conventional explanations. Entry 17. The 2001 anthrax attacks. Moving on to entry 17, we encounter the unsettling 2001 anthrax attacks, also known as the Amerithrax attacks. These incidents unfolded 1 week after the September 11th terrorist attacks, with anthrax spores mailed to news media offices and politicians. The attacks resulted in the deaths of 5 people and infected 17 others. The FBI conducted an extensive investigation, initially focusing on bioweapons expert Stephen Hatfield, who was later exonerated. The investigation shifted to Bruce Edward Ivins, a scientist at Fort Detrick in Maryland, who became the main suspect. However, Ivins would no longer be living in 2008 before formal charges were brought against him. This case remains complex and controversial, with doubts about Ivins' involvement based on scientific evidence. The FBI formally closed the investigation in 2010, but a 2011 review by the National Academy of Sciences cast doubt on Ivins being the sole perpetrator. The anthrax attacks continue to be a chapter in American history, shrouded in uncertainty. Entry 18. The Alps shootings. Advancing to entry 18, we confront the mysterious Alps shootings, also known as the Annecy shootings or the Chevaline killings. This tragic incident occurred on September 5, 2012, near Chevaline, Haute-Savoie, France. 3 members of a British family and a French citizen lost their lives on the Route Frostière du Plan des Areales, close to the southern end of Lake Annecy. The victims included Saad Al-Hili, his wife Iqbal, her mother Souali Al-Alaf, and French cyclist Sylvain Molière. Notably, Saad Al-Hili's 2 daughters survived the attack. Despite extensive investigations, French police stated in September 2017 that they had no working theory to explain the murders and no suspects. The motive and identity of the perpetrators behind the Alps shootings continue to elude authorities, leaving the case unsolved and perplexing. Entry 19. Amber Hagerman. Moving on to entry 19, we encounter the heartbreaking case of Amber Hagerman. In the blink of an eye, the life of 9-year-old Amber changed forever when she was abducted while riding her bike near her grandmother's home in Texas. 8 minutes after her departure, Amber's innocence was brutally shattered. Her body was discovered in a creek bed 4 days later, with her throat cut. Despite intense efforts to solve the case, Amber's murderer remains at large, leaving her grieving family without closure. The unsolved murder of Amber Hagerman serves as a haunting reminder of the vulnerability of innocence and the challenges in finding justice for such senseless acts. Entry 20. The Darden Family. Advancing to entry 20, we explore the chilling case of the Darden family murders. On November 18, 1987, a devastating crime was uncovered in Illinois when police arrived at the mobile home of Russell Keith Darden. His wife and son were brutally beaten, and Ruby Ellen Darden, pregnant with the couple's daughter, had been beaten so severely that she went into labor. The newborn was also tragically killed. While investigators initially suspected Keith, he was found shot and mutilated the next day. The case, marked by a lack of motive or identified suspects, remains unsolved. The Darden family murders continue to haunt the community, leaving them grappling with an unspeakable act of violence without resolution. Entry 21. Mr. Cruel. Entering entry 21, we confront the unsettling case of Mr. Cruel, an unidentified suspect involved in a series of child abductions and the murder of Carmen Chan in Melbourne during the late 1980s and early 1990s. Operating with intelligence and meticulous precision, Mr. Cruel conducted surveillance on his victims, leaving no forensic traces behind. Despite a reward of $200,000 and an increased reward in 2016, Mr. Cruel remains at large, leaving behind a trail of unsolved and deeply troubling cold cases. The name Mr. Cruel epitomizes the fear and anxiety that surrounds these horrific crimes, and the elusive perpetrator continues to evade capture. Entry 22, Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre. Moving on to Entry 22, we confront the horrifying and brutal Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre, which unfolded on February 10, 1990, in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Two unidentified robbers entered the bowling alley, carrying out a heinous act of violence that claimed the lives of 7 people. The perpetrator targeted victims in an office, shooting at them mercilessly before setting fire to a desk and leaving the scene. Despite thorough investigations, the case remains unsolved, leaving the community haunted by the memory of this shocking and unspeakable crime. Entry 23, the Cleveland Torso Killer. Advancing to Entry 23, we uncover the chilling case of the Cleveland Torso Killer, who terrorized the city of Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s. This unidentified serial killer, also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, carried out a string of gruesome killings involving the dismemberment of 13 known victims. The murders were particularly gruesome, with the killer disposing of the remains in the impoverished neighborhood of Kingsbury Run. Despite the efforts of lawman Elliot Ness, who led the investigation, the Cleveland Torso Killer eluded capture. The mystery surrounding the identity of this notorious killer remains one of the city's most chilling unsolved cases. Entry 24, West Mesa Murders. Entry 24 brings us to the haunting West Mesa murders that shook Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the nation. In 2009, the remains of 11 women were discovered buried in the desert on the West Mesa. This devastating crime prompted law enforcement to unravel the person or persons responsible for these heinous acts. While several suspects have been named, no one has been arrested or charged in connection with these murders. Initially believed to be the work of a serial killer, the case took a disturbing turn with the suspicion of involvement in a trafficking ring. The investigation, spanning multiple states, has left the victims' families and the community yearning for justice and closure. The West Mesa murders remain unsolved, casting a long shadow over the quest for truth in this deeply troubling case. The next entry is the Eastbound Strangler. The Eastbound Strangler, an unidentified serial killer, is believed to have terrorized Atlantic City, New Jersey in 2006. This ruthless perpetrator is suspected to be responsible for the murders of 4 women, all identified as prostitutes. Their bodies were discovered in a drainage ditch behind the Golden Key Motel on the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township near Atlantic City. The chilling discovery took place on November 20th, 2006. The victims were found face down, all facing east, approximately 60 feet apart. The killer had removed their shoes and socks before taking their lives through strangulation. Despite intense efforts by law enforcement, the case remains unsolved. A $25,000 reward for information leading to the apprehension of the Eastbound Strangler remains unclaimed, adding to the frustration and urgency in solving these crimes. The Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears is a 447-mile corridor in British Columbia, Canada, where numerous Indigenous women have gone missing or been murdered since 1970. Factors like poverty and drug abuse contribute to the high number of victims, and the cases remain largely unsolved. The Monster with 21 Faces. The Monster with 21 Faces, also referred to as Keija Nuja Menso, earned its name during the Glico Morinaga case in Japan in 1984. An enigmatic and exclusive group, known as the Monster with 21 Faces, unleashed a series of threats and extortion attempts that sent shockwaves throughout the nation. In March 1994, two masked men broke into the home of Glico president Katsushi Azaki, leading to a reign of terror, including arson and extortion. Despite investigations and conjectures, the true identity of the Monster with 21 Faces remains a mystery, leaving unsettling legacies of unsolved crimes and unanswered questions. Sydney Ghost Train Fire. The 1979 Sydney Ghost Train Fire occurred on June 9, 1979, when a devastating fire engulfed the ghost train ride at Luna Park, Sydney, resulting in the tragic deaths of 7 people, including 6 children and 1 adult. The incident unfolded due to inadequate firefighting measures and low staffing at the amusement park. Although initially attributed to electrical faults, speculation about arson involving known figures resurfaced. The exact cause of the fire could not be determined through a coronal inquiry, and the investigation faced numerous challenges, leaving lingering questions and emotional scars for the victims' families and the broader community. Lane Bryant Shooting. The Lane Bryant shooting occurred on February 2, 2008, at a Lane Bryant clothing outlet in the Brookside Marketplace in Tinley Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. During this tragic incident, 5 people were killed and 6 individuals were injured. The unidentified perpetrator, who carried out the armed robbery and mass murder, remains unknown to this day. Despite an intensive investigation and the release of a sketch of the suspect, the case remains unsolved. The Sherman Murders. Barry Sherman, a prominent Canadian businessman and philanthropist, was found dead in his home on December 13, 2017. As the chairman and CEO of Apotex Incorporated, a major pharmaceutical company, Sherman's death sparked widespread debate and skepticism. Despite controversy surrounding the initial assessment of the deaths as murders, the investigation continued. As of May 2022, the case remains active and ongoing, with the Sherman murders still unsolved. The couple's dedication to charitable causes and community development added layers of complexity to the mystery. The Mad Pooper. The Mad Pooper, a bizarre nickname given to an unidentified woman in Colorado Springs, Colorado, gained notoriety during the summer of 2017. She repeatedly defecated in public, with the primary target being a specific family's property. Despite a public outcry and law enforcement efforts, her true identity and motives remain unknown. Speculations range from medical issues to revenge tendencies, but the mystery persists. Phantom social workers. The term phantom social workers emerged in the early 1990s in both the United Kingdom and the United States, denoting individuals claiming to be social workers attempting to abduct children from their parents. Despite sporadic reports to law enforcement and media, these claims lacked substantial evidence, and no suspects were identified. While the phenomenon initially sparked community concerns and fears, reports of phantom social workers gradually diminished over the years. However, the mystery surrounding these alleged imposters persists, leaving an indelible impact on the collective consciousness. The unresolved nature of this issue raises questions about whether or not these were genuine threats or a series of unfounded rumors. The Geezer Bandit. The Geezer Bandit earned notoriety from the FBI due to a series of bank robberies committed in Southern California between August 2009 and December 2011. Despite his appearance suggesting an individual in his mid to late 70s, speculation arose that the culprit might be employing a sophisticated disguise, potentially a silicone mask. The Geezer Bandit's ability to evade capture, along with suspicions about his age, prompted inquiries to his true identity. Media attention and public speculation surrounded this mysterious figure. Despite these efforts, the identity of the Geezer bandit remains elusive, leaving behind a legacy of cunning robberies and unanswered questions for those who pursued him. Broadband Killers. The Broadband Killers, alternatively known as the Magellan Gang in Dutch-speaking media, and the Mad Killers of Broadband in French-speaking media, orchestrated a series of violent attacks, primarily in the Belgian provinces of Broadband, between 1982 and 1985. The gang, consisting of a core group with specific roles, was responsible for 28 deaths and 22 injuries during this crime spree. Despite extensive investigative resources, the identities and whereabouts of the Broadband Killers remains unknown. A surprising turn of events involved the retirement of original senior detectives accused of evidence tampering. The gang abruptly ceased its violent activities in 1985, leading to an investigation struggling to make substantial progress in solving these notorious crimes. Franciscan Priest Murders. The Franciscan Priest Murders refers to a perplexing series of disappearances and murders involving two Catholic priests in the western United States between 1982 and 1984. Father Ray and Aldo Rivera was murdered in 1982, while Father John Kerrigan disappeared in 1984. Despite some shared circumstances, no definitive connection between the two cases has ever been established. Kerrigan's remains were never recovered, adding an extra layer of mystery. In 2015, the Diocese of Elena implicated Kerrigan in SA allegations, further complicating the narrative surrounding these unfortunate deaths. The unresolved nature of these priest murders raises questions about potential connections and the pursuit of justice for the victims. Alphabet Murders. The Alphabet Murders, also known as the Double Initial Murders, represent an unsolved series of chilling child murders that transpired between 1971 and 1973 in Rochester, New York. 3 young girls aged 10 or 11, each with first names starting with the same letter as their hometowns, fell victim to SA and brutal murders. Despite relentless efforts in the investigation, no suspect has ever been conclusively identified. The haunting pattern of victims' names and the brutality of crimes have perplexed law enforcement, making the Alphabet Murders one of Rochester's most enduring and haunting mysteries. Many in the community continue to hope for closure and justice for the innocent victims and their grieving families. The Bible Belt Strangler. The Bible Belt Strangler, also known as the Redhead Murders, encompasses a series of unsolved homicides of red-headed females in the United States between 1978 and 1992. Believed to be the work of an unidentified male serial killer, these gruesome murders have occurred across various states. The victims, young women with reddish hair, were found abandoned along major highways, suggesting a possible connection to hitchhiking or involvement in SW. The exact number of victims remains uncertain, with estimates ranging from 5 to 14. The elusive Bible Belt Strangler continues to cast a shadow on the communities in the affected regions, leaving authorities uncertain about the true extent and identity of the perpetrator responsible for these heart-wrenching crimes. 2006 Sacramento County Deaths. In 2006, Sacramento County Sheriff's Deputy Jareth Mitchell was killed during a traffic stop, leading to a violent struggle. A white van connected to the incident was later found with 2 bodies inside, raising question about a potential link between the killings and Deputy Mitchell's death. Despite intensive investigations, the case remains unsolved, leaving lingering questions about the circumstances surrounding these tragic events. Abduction of Violet Ripken. Violet Ripken was abducted from her home in Aberdeen, Maryland, and returned unharmed after approximately 23 hours. The motive behind the abduction remained unclear, as the kidnappers seemed unaware of Violet's identity as the wife of a famous baseball player. Despite the release of surveillance footage and images of the suspect, no ransom demand was ever made. The investigation, involving local police and the FBI, faced challenges with no definitive leads, leaving the case unresolved. The Zip Gun Bomber. The Zip Gun Bomber case revolves around Joan Betty Dallas, a high school guidance counselor from Brooklyn, New York, tragically killed on May 7, 1982, by a bomb concealed in a package. The investigation into her murder yielded no concrete leads or suspects, and the case eventually went cold. Similar bombings occurred over a decade later, raising suspicions of a connection, but the identity of the Zip Gun Bomber remains unknown, and the case remains unsolved. The Jack family. The Jack family received the job offer at a logging camp near Prince George, British Columbia. They left with a man who offered to drive them to the site but never returned. The family was reported missing and remains unaccounted for. Despite extensive investigations, the fate of the Jack family and the identity of the suspect remain unknown, leaving unanswered questions and a lingering sense of mystery. Storyville Slayer. The Storyville Slayer is the nickname given to the American serial killer who murdered at least 24 prostitutes and drug addicts, primarily women, in New Orleans, Louisiana. The investigation considered two separate suspects, with one convicted of one murder, leading investigators to believe that multiple killers may be responsible. The true identity of the Storyville Slayer remains elusive, and the case remains unsolved. The Florence Salon Murders. In November 2001, the Hair Gallery Salon in Florence, Montana, became the scene of a brutal triple murder. Eyewitnesses described an oddly dressed man leaving the salon, but the motive and suspect remained unknown. Despite FBI involvement and efforts to create a profile, the case remains unsolved, changing the perception of safety in the small town and leaving the community haunted by the unresolved tragedy. Shaw Creek Killer. In 1987, hunters found skeletal remains near Shaw Creek, South Carolina, with signs of posing and evidence of cocaine in the hair. The victim's identity remained unknown for over 30 years, and 3 more bodies were found in the area, possibly victims of the same killer. While one victim was identified in 1999, no further breakthroughs have occurred in the case, and the Shaw Creek Killer remains unidentified, leaving a cloud of mystery surrounding these unsettling discoveries. Septic Tank Sam. Once known as Septic Tank Sam, this murder victim's remains were discovered in a septic tank in Lindbergh, Alberta, Canada in 1977. Despite signs of torture and a brutal death, including beatings, burn marks, and SM, the victim's true identity remained a mystery for decades. In January 2021, the remains were identified as Sanderson, shedding light on the case. Despite ongoing investigations, Sanderson's murderers remain unknown, with suspicions that they may have been associates involved in criminal activities in Edmonton. Borrowing Burglars. In 1986, the Borrowing Burglars executed an elaborate bank heist in Hollywood, California, involving tunneling into the bank vault system. Despite their meticulous planning and near success, the burglars, known for their remarkable engineering skills, remained unidentified. A year later, they attempted another robbery but were forced to flee. After these incidents, the Borrowing Burglars retired from their criminal endeavors, and the case became unsolved, leading to the intriguing mystery of their identities. Castration Murders. The castration serial murders unfolded between 1980 and 1986 involving the kidnapping, shooting, and post-mortem castration of young men across multiple American states. Initially thought to be unrelated, forensic evidence in 1989 linked two victims, suggesting a potential connection. The perpetrator, or perpetrators, behind these chilling crimes remains unknown, adding an unsettling chapter to the annals of unsolved serial murders. Night Watcher robberies. The Night Watcher, a masked man, targeted affluent families in Surrey, carrying out a series of robberies between 2014 and 2017. Armed with a sawed-off shotgun, he demanded jewelry and access to family safes, leaving behind a trail of fear and concern. Despite investigations, the Night Watcher's identity remains elusive. The arrest of another burglar, the Wimbledon Prowler, provided some relief, but the connection between the two criminals remains uncertain. Murder of Tristan Burbach. Tristan Burbach, a 13-year-old German boy, was brutally murdered in the Frankfurt suburb of Hetternheim, found beaten, strangled, and mutilated. The motive behind his death remains unknown. Witnesses unknowingly observed the murder from a distance, providing a description of the suspect. Despite extensive investigations, including a large-scale fingerprinting operation, the case remains unsolved, casting a shadow on the tragic events surrounding Tristan Burbach. Tromanov beheadings. The Tromanov beheadings in 2012 shocked Ukraine when a judge and his family were beheaded with a machete. Vladimir Tromanov, his wife, son, and son's girlfriend were attacked in Kharkov, Ukraine. The motive behind the murders, either revenge or theft, remains unclear. The case gained international attention, exposing flaws in the Ukrainian judicial system. The identity of the perpetrator and the reasons behind this gruesome act continue to elude authorities. Italian Unabomber. The Italian Unabomber orchestrated a series of bombings in the Veneto region of Italy between 1994 and 2006, targeting public places with booby-trapped objects. The attacks caused injuries, including the removal of digits and limbs. Despite numerous incidents, the Italian Unabomber made no political or economic demands. The case took a twist when Elvo Zarinta, an engineer, was placed under surveillance but later released due to lack of evidence. As of October 2022, the Italian Unabomber remains unidentified, with the case reopened based on newly discovered DNA and blood traces. The Father's Day Bank Massacre. The Father's Day Bank Massacre unfolded on Sunday, June 16, 1991, at the United Bank Tower in Denver, Colorado. The tragic event marked a violent turn during a bank robbery, resulting in the deaths of 4 unarmed bank guards and sending shockwaves throughout the community. Around 4 a.m. on Father's Day, an alarm was triggered in a basement storage room at the United Bank Tower. However, records indicated that the guard room and the control center ignored the alarm, taking no further action. The connection between this incident and the upcoming robbery remains unclear. At approximately 9:14 a.m., a man claiming to be Robert Bardwell, a vice president at the bank, requested entry through a side-free elevator. Using the street-level security phone, he contacted the bank's guard room, where guard William McCollum Jr. responded. Tragically, as the elevator doors opened, the gunman forced McCollum to ride to the other area of the bank, where he was then killed, and his electric pass card was taken. The perpetrator continued his sinister journey throughout the bank tunnels, reaching the basement level where the vault and guard station were located. An alarm was triggered at 9:20 a.m. when he entered the stairwell, but it seemingly had little effect on his actions. Inside the vault area, the intruder confronted guards Philip McAnuff and Scott McCarthy, forcing them into a battery room where he fatally shot both men. A third guard, Todd Wilson, may have returned to the area during or immediately after the shooting and was also killed. The gunman fired 18 shots throughout the killing spree, leaving none of the 4 murdered bank guards armed and vulnerable to a merciless attack. Before leaving the guardroom and entering the vault area, the intruder tampered with evidence to erase traces of his identity. He collected 10 videotapes, keys, a 2-way radio, and pages from the guard logbook, leaving little behind to identify him. After gaining access to the vault at 9:48 a.m., he encountered 6 vault employees, ordering them to cover their eyes and lie on the floor. The robber then demanded that the senior vault manager, David Baranko, to fill a satchel with cash before making his escape at 9:56 a.m. He left the tellers locked inside a small room known as a man trap. Despite extensive investigations and a nationally broadcast trial on court TV, authorities arrested retired police officer James W. King as a suspect on July 4, 1991. However, the jury later acquitted him, and none of the stolen money was ever recovered. The Father's Day Bank Massacre remains an unsolved cold case, haunting the memories of the victims' families and the community at large. The elusive identity of the perpetrator, described as a man in his late 50s or 60s, wearing distinctive attire, continues to puzzle investigators and law enforcement, leaving June 16, 1991, a somber day in Denver's history. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.